Hello, hello, and welcome. I'm so glad to be here today. I know it's been a little couple of weeks since I've done a video. I've been super busy. I hope you all are well. And today I just wanted to share with you um, what you can expect when you leave your church, um, how you can expect to feel, and also just what you can expect from others around you. First off, you can expect to feel very, at first, sort of relieved in a way, with an underlying feeling of needing to be back, like that underlying guilt, shame for leaving, um, just sort of an overall unsettled feeling, but also there's a part of you that's going to feel very relieved. And then you can also expect to feel somewhat lonely, and the guilt can set in, um, second guessing your decision. And then after that, it's sort of that whole minimizing the experience, because you're going to go into a grieving process. You'll start the whole grieving process. And so you may have already started that sort of at the end of the time that you spent at your church. The anger, the denial, the whole gamut of the grief process that we can go through. The anxiety, the depression, the bargaining, the whole gamut, just the denial of what's going on. And a lot of times we sort of start that well before we leave. The anger and the denial seem to be sort of a big thing. And, the bargaining, things will get better. If this were to happen, things would get better, so on and so forth. And so when you actually finally make the decision to leave, there's that whole group of people that are going to be like, oh, we'll still be in touch, and we're brothers and sisters in the Lord, or whatever it is, we're family, we're community, whatever their Christianese verbiage is, whatever they tell you. And so that kind of leaves you with a little bit of a sense of security in a way. And in another way, there's going to be some of those people you're like, I don't want to see them anymore. And then also, feeling like, okay, I can do this. When I leave, I'm still going to have these people in my life. And I can tell you, I've been through this several times, and I have a tendency to learn things the hard way. And so I can speak from experience. And every single time, the same thing will happen. And so that's why I feel I can speak on this. And I've also helped other people, and I've heard their stories. And it's the same across the board. So when you leave, you're going to feel lonely. You're going to go start the grieving process. You could be just a mixed bag of emotions. The first few weeks, you're just like, hallelujah, I don't have to be anywhere. And, there's that whole just like relaxing, or, doing other things. And then, there's that underlying just the guilt and just that nagging feeling, because it's been so ingrained in us that we have to go to church, to be a good Christian, or to have relationship with God, or that, God first, but really they mean church first. And that's not the case. And I talked a little bit about that in one of my other videos. So I'm not going to go into that here. But when the loneliness sets in, that's when things can tend to, we can sort of minimize what went on there. And well, it wasn't so bad. Now, you are going to have friends, depending on your level of involvement at your church. Most of the churches that I was at, I was very involved in, and I had, quite a few friends in the church. And so a couple of them, I was there every time the doors were open. I served on many levels. And so when I left, I went from being busy every night and weekend day, just about outside of work, with my church. And so when I left, it was this huge, I had all of this time. And so there was a huge part of me that felt the need to fill that time, sort of just that underlying being unsettled. And then loneliness set in. And, when you're feeling kind of lonely, you can, when you're used to being busy, busy, busy all the time, and then you suddenly are at the opposite end of the spectrum, then you have this like underlying need to be busy because that became your comfort zone. That became very comfortable to you. And so going from, 100% in to 100% out, you can have those feelings of loneliness and you can feel lonely. And it's like, well, what am I going to do? Because your whole life was sort of wrapped up in this entity and with the people that were there. And so when you leave, you may have some of them say, okay, yeah, we support your decision, this and that. Well, I can tell you that most of those people do not support your decision. Most of those people are thinking that you're making a huge mistake and that at some point in time, hopefully in the near future, you're going to come to your senses and you're going to come back. Now, some of the words that they use are terms like you're backsliding, you're in sin, you're just making a mistake. You didn't hear from God correctly. There's something going on. They have this idea with you that somehow you're involved in some sort of sin or something isn't right. And that's why you're leaving. And so at some point, they're thinking and praying that you'll come to your senses and you'll come back, right? We know that misery loves company. And I can tell you the majority of those people that are in that church are miserable. And so they're wanting you to come back. They just aren't brave enough or strong enough to leave. And you were. And so there is going to be that underlying tension there between them and you, no matter how close of friends that you were. Okay. Plus, it's they've been indoctrinated too to believe that you need to go to church in order to be a Christian, a good Christian, or have a relationship with the Lord. And so now you've discovered that isn't necessarily true. Maybe you haven't discovered that. You just know you need to leave that church, that it isn't a safe or healthy place for you. So what you can expect from yourself is just sort of a mixed bag of emotions. And the loneliness, the grieving process is going to set in, and the excitement. Sometimes, you're just like, woohoo, I did it, I'm out. Okay. And finding things to fill that void. There's also a need to fill the void of time, the time void. And sort of your relationship with God can seem so much different. Now, for me, I really began to grow as a believer once I left the church. And, there were things I've talked about in my other, videos, like setting my Bible aside for a long time. It was just really difficult for me to pick it up and read it. But I did maintain relationship with the Lord because I knew there was something in me that knew that it wasn't him who was abusing me or hurting me, wounding me, whatever you want to call it, traumatizing me. It was man. And so for me, when I left, and all of those emotions and things, I was pretty much felt alone because my family was in a completely different place. They were not in the church or anything. And so, that wasn't a place where I could go and actually talk about what was going on. At that point in time, through a lot of it, I didn't have a coach. I did later on. And so initially, not having anybody to sort of work through this with, I turned to God, right? And so that really helped me to grow in my spiritual walk, my relationship with the Lord, whatever you want to call it. Now, I did, obviously, because I went through this several times, I did have that underlying battle going on that I felt like I had to be in the church because it had been so ingrained in me. And so I was, even though I had a lot more peace, I had this underlying, unsettled feeling about needing to fill that busy void and needing to be included and in community and fellowship and in right standing with God, which meant being involved in a church or a ministry, because that's what we're taught, that you have to go to church to be a good Christian, right? You need to be there. And to be a really good Christian and to be, worthy of anything, you need to be serving. And so I had that like underlying feeling of being unsettled. And so you may be experiencing that now. And I can tell you that you can experience all of this in a day, or maybe one thing here and one thing there. But initially, the first several months, it's, a range of emotions. And when you're in the church, we're taught, don't let your emotions dictate. Don't, stuff those emotions. Emotions are bad. There's a whole other thing. I'm not going to get into that in this video. Maybe in another video, we'll talk about just some of the lies that go on that they teach you about your emotions and your heart in the church. And so when you have all these emotions coming up, when you leave, it can be difficult because you can be so used to stuffing them and you really just don't even know. Like for me, I didn't even really know at times like what my emotions were, how I felt. The basic ones, mad, sad, glad. But and even with anger, we're taught that anger is a sin. Well, it's not, right? It's what you do when you're angry. And anger is a big part of it, and we feel bad about being angry. And that's just sort of a natural response. It's part of the grieving process. And sometimes that can go on for a matter of months, and sometimes it can be a matter of years, depending on how we're processing it and how wounded we were, how much time we wasted, we gave to that church entity or church organization. So we talked about the grieving process, feeling lonely. We can feel like rejected. We can feel abandoned, because I can tell you initially you may have some contact with some of the people in the church just because it's been routine. But when you're not there with them on a regular basis, remember, they're thinking that you are somehow in sin, backslidden, that you've made a bad mistake, right? So their communication is not going to be what it was before, and that is slowly going to die off. And you might get some phone calls from people saying things like, well, was it really that bad? Was it bad enough that you really had to leave? Where are you going? What church are you going to now? Where are you fellowshipping now? And when you say nowhere, well, why don't you just come back here until you find a place? Or maybe you should go. Then they'll start giving you advice and telling you what to do. Not necessarily giving you advice. They're going to start telling you what to do, directing you, and minimizing your experience. What they don't do that they should be doing is listening to you, listening to how you feel, listening to why you left, and understanding and valuing that in you, and affirming, whether they agree with it or not. If they actually love you and they're friends with you and what have you, they should be understanding that this is what happened to you, this is what you're going through. And not that you need to tell everybody, because you don't. You can simply just say, I don't feel led to be here anymore, or I've made a decision to leave this church. I'm taking a long break from church right now. I mean, there's a number of things that you can say without getting into the details. And you don't really have to give them any reason at all if you choose not to. Now, if you were serving and all of that, then, I would recommend just, saying, I'm just leaving. I just feel led to leave right now. And just keep it very simple. You don't need to lie. You don't need to make up some extravagant story. You don't need to, make them feel good about why you're leaving. You don't need to say, I'll probably be back or I might be back. Because when you leave, you're not planning on going back. So I don't believe that that's really being honest. And that also opens up another door to them calling and asking you when you're coming back. When is this vacation? Because they just think you're on a vacation, you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. That's going to be the case when you leave. They're going to be thinking that you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing. And so if you say you're just taking a break and you might come back, then they're waiting for you to stop doing whatever it is that you're doing wrong and come back. So I don't recommend saying that. I did another video where I talked about different things that you can say when you leave. And so getting back on subject, you'll have some of those people calling in, hey, how are you? Where are you at? They're basically just gathering information. And I like to refer to it as re-recruiting you. And this is a long, drawn out process for a lot of people. Again, depending on how involved you were, whether you were in the inner circle or if you were just like the peon sitting in the pew, you're going to have them call and check on you. And they're going to minimize and invite you back. And that will kind of go on. You might get a few phone calls at first and you'll feel like, oh yeah, I'm still connected to the people that I want to be connected to. Well, then that kind of gets further and further, more and more spread out. And then you might get a call from the pastor or associate pastor, somebody in leadership, maybe even the youth pastor, just depending, because they have meetings, and they talk about attendance and things like that. And if you had been there for any length of time, your name's going to most likely come up, unless you were in like some huge church where there's, hundreds or thousands of people. Your name will come up and, well, let's touch base and see where they're at. And so you'll get those. You'll get the re-recruiting phone calls, and you'll have the diehards that are going to do this like every, 3-6 months for the first couple of years. So that's what you can expect. And you can also expect that when you answer the phone, they're going to re-recruit you. Hi, how are you doing? We miss you. It's going to come with a whole dish full of guilt. There will probably be some shaming going on. So they're just going to open up those wounds and you'll start the whole thing over again. You'll most likely regret that you answered the phone. And when the phone's ringing, you're probably not going to want to answer it, or you might initially, because initially you're still wanting connection with some of those people. You're just not wanting to be a part of the nonsense, or you don't want to be abused anymore or wounded or whatever. So again, every time you talk to it's going to sort of bring up some more emotion and stuff. And so learning about the different emotions, learning about your emotions, learning how to feel them, how to acknowledge them, to know what they are, how to, how to not, I don't like the term release, but how to get into that place with your emotions to where healing can come, because you will need to be healed. If you've been wounded or hurt on any level, there is some sort of healing that needs to happen, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be leaving your church. Unless you're one of those people who just was like, yeah, I don't want to be here. And if you are that person, that is awesome. If you can just say, yeah, this isn't for me, and leave. I can do that now, but it took me several rounds of, trauma and abuse and all of that to come to that place. I'd really rather just not even go there anymore, to be honest. But anyway, so we have the emotions, we have the grieving process, we have the re-recruitment phase. We also will have if you run into them in public, the first phase of that is usually just not even acknowledge that you exist, because there has to be some level of punishment for you when you leave. They want you to miss. They want you to come to your senses and come back, okay? Sometimes they will send what they're called flying monkeys, and those are the big recruiters. So you might get one into your place of business, where you work, stop by your house. That is a little bit of an extreme level, but I have had that happen to me several times. And just in a couple of the churches that I was in, not all of them. So that is very extreme. And if that happens, then I would recommend setting some very strong boundaries and saying, this is not okay for you to come here unannounced, or come to my place of business or where I work. And that is not okay on any level. If it's somebody that you were close with and they ask, hey, can I come by? Then, that's one thing if you give them permission to, but to just randomly stop by, I don't think that that's okay. So the other thing that you can expect is a desire to go back, because you have the emotions, you have the re-recruiting going on, and you have all these other tactics that they can, what do they call that? Tough love, or they might send you cards, they might, call a lot or drop a text or an email, we really miss you, and sort of guilt you into coming back. And so it's perfectly normal to have a desire to go back and maybe even step back in. Okay, so you can expect that. What I recommend as a coach when I help people is to, when you first leave, make a list of why it is that you left. And make a note, yes, it was bad enough for me to leave, and I don't want to go back. So that when the phase comes to where you're sort of like, well, it wasn't that bad. Maybe there was something in me that wasn't right. Maybe it was just me, or maybe I did just need to kind of step back and get refreshed, or, get right or something. And then you do go back, and then you realize again, you might be there for an extended period of time. You go through the whole wounding again, and it'll be worse than the first time. And so I don't recommend doing that. I recommend writing it down. And then when you feel like going back, picking that piece of paper up and actually reading it and believing it, because there was a reason, right? And when you leave, you don't want to go backwards. You want to go forwards. And even if you decide that you want to go to church again, you can find a new place to go, and you can find new friends. Now, if you had friends in your old church and they've stopped talking to you, they were not your friends. Now, and there's a lot of those fake friendships that go on. Okay, whether you are part of their accountability group or home group, or you served with them, you were in their sort of sub ministry or whatever it was, and they're like, oh yeah, you're my friend, my buddy, my pal, and you leave, and then you're not. Okay, now if you're only their friend when you're attending the church or being involved in some aspect with them, some group or home, whatever, and then when you go, they're no longer connected to you, then they weren't your friend to begin with. And then we start the grieving process for that. And we feel rejected, we feel abandoned, and that is perfectly normal, because we thought these were our church family, we thought these were our friends, and this was our community, these are the people that are supposed to love us. And so then that just is a whole other set of hurt that we need to work through. So having an understanding that it is not you. Okay. It has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. And that is something that they need to figure out. They need to work through with God. They need to work through with themselves. Is if you're a friend, you're a friend. You're not just a friend because somebody's doing something for you, or you're go to a group or an organization, whether it's church or not, and then because they're gone, you're just going to write them off. That's not okay, especially in the church, especially when these people call you family and call you friends, and there's the love of God, and there's all these things that they preach and talk about. So that is some of the worst rejection and worst pain and worst abandonment thing that can come, is from those people who, when you leave, unless you're there, they are no longer your friends. So that is something that we will go through, especially if we had, there was at one point, I lost like 30, I had like 30 friends. Everybody just stopped talking to me. It was horrible. And I had just I was going through a divorce, and that was like, and then my grandma, who I was very close to, died, and it all happened at once. And all those people stopped talking to me. I was sort of silently excommunicated, as I call it, from this one church. And I'm not sure why, but I do believe because that church pastor supposedly had a 1% divorce rate. And even though I didn't initiate that divorce, and I did everything I could to make things work, including counseling with that pastor, which that was a joke, by the way. And I don't recommend doing marriage counseling with your pastor unless they've been trained in some way. But they all just stopped talking to me. And there were some accusations there that were pretty bad too, but actually a very close friend of mine too. So that is very painful. And that is something that you can expect to happen. Now, had I known that that was going to happen, I believe that I would have been more prepared and wouldn't have had the level of hurt that I did. So that is the reason why I'm sharing this with you, is so that you can have that understanding. And it doesn't have anything to do with you. It had nothing to do with me as a person, and it had everything to do with them and what they have been indoctrinated with, and just all of the lies and stuff that come with being in a part of that, right? And so knowing that those people, they are actually, they need some serious help. And um, knowing is half the battle. And so I believe that had I known it wasn't me, because I spent a long time thinking, what did I do wrong? Like, what did I do to deserve this? And you know what? I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything to deserve this. So, and I actually left that church because I was caring for my grandparents, and I was doing that like 24 hours a day for, a short period of time. And so I wasn't able to go to church. That was sort of, and then it all sort of unfolded all at once. And nobody would answer my phone calls, and on and on. Anyway, I will do a whole other video because that is part of my story. And I haven't done that in a while. I think I did a few sharing a little bit of my story, but that part was probably one of the worst. And I will share that with you. But so if you know that, just know that it's not you. It really isn't you. And my heart truly goes out to you, because there is so much loss. And, I teach this in my spiritual healing circle, that the grieving process there's just so much to grieve when you've been wounded in the church, and when you finally get the courage to leave the church. There's just, the grieving process can be just very intense in a way. And most people don't even know what's going on, honestly. Like, most people don't even know that they're being wounded or, abused in the church. And then when they finally have had enough and they leave, and then this whole other process starts, they really don't know what's going on. And I didn't. And that's part of why I'm here helping you, is so that you don't have to go through what I went through. And you can be ahead of the game, so to speak, ahead of the healing game, and you know what's coming. And when we know what's coming, then we're able to handle it better. So that's pretty much it. It balances out after a while. They kind of forget about you and they move on, and you move on. And then it just becomes, depending on if you're small town or live close by or whatever, you might run into some of those people at church. Not at church. Sorry, that is not what I meant to say. You might run into them at the grocery store, out shopping, and then the question that they typically ask is, so where are you going to church now? I now just say, my relationship with the Lord is great right now. Thank you for asking. It was great to see you. I gotta go. And I walk away. And the look on their face is like this deer in the headlight thing. So I don't even entertain that anymore. If that's the first thing out of their mouth, then sorry. They honestly it's none of their business about my life, right? If you haven't seen them in a while, and the first thing out of their mouth is, oh, hi, good to see you. Where do you go to church now? They don't care about me. It's just some weird thing. And so what about going to church? You don't have to go to church to be a good Christian or have a relationship with the Lord, grow in your spiritual walk, whatever you want to call it, right? You don't need to. You don't need to be a part of a church organization in order to do that. So that's what I want to share with you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. If you want to jump in the spiritual healing circle, let me know. If you need a coach, let me know. I'd be more than happy to help you with that too. I highly recommend getting a coach when you leave, so that you have some support, that you have somebody there for you to help you work through this process, so that you don't feel alone. And a lot of times a coach is a great idea because we're sort of on the outside of your situation. And so we can be a really good support system for you. And we can also help you work through the process and get through it like a little quicker, help you work through the grieving process so much quicker than when you're alone and you're doing this alone, and all that going. Hit the like button, subscribe, comment. If it's a negative comment, then feel free to go ahead and keep that one to yourself. All right. Love you guys. Take care, and I will see you next time. Bye.